Good afternoon, everybody, and thanks so much for the invitation. It's an honor to be here at Academia Sinica and being able to share some considerations around the origin and the impact of the EU AI Act. So I'll try to keep it to hopefully 30-40 minutes. But so if I'm going too far, you give me a sign, and I will try to accelerate. I can get carried away when I speak about this work. Is it okay if I stay here, or people can see? Okay. So I want to spend a couple of minutes to give you a sense of the process. The AI Act, as you know, it's the law already. So we could already just start talking about the law. But I think it's always useful, especially for audience that are not European, although I have to acknowledge that even European audience sometimes are confused about what is the European Commission, what is the European Parliament, what is the Council, because it's a regional organization. So it's not really part of the national jurisdictions. So even in Europe, sometimes people are confused. And so, but I want to spend a couple of minutes on process, because the process matters. So the reason why we have certain results is also because we have this process. So to start with, so the European Commission, that's the institution where I used to work. The European Commission acts in the EU legal framework as the executive. It's what would be in the national context, the government. However, the Commission, the European Commission, has one prerogative, which is that of proposing legislation. So the European Commission has this peculiarity to propose legislation. If the Commission does not submit any draft, there is no legislation. So in that sense, as you can imagine, the Commission has a very peculiar role in the EU, which is that of setting the agenda for EU policymaking. A draft bill cannot be proposed by anyone else except the Commission. So once the Commission presents a bill, and for the AI Act that happened in April of last year, in April 2021, the bill is sent in parallel to two other institutions, the European Parliament and the Council. The European Parliament is directly elected by the people across the European Union. So there is direct elections. Therefore, the members of the Parliament represent the people, if you want. The Council is the body that represents the governments of the EU. And those two bodies have to agree. So therefore, once the proposal is adopted by the European Commission, it's sent in parallel to those two chambers, if you want. And then they spend some time in reviewing the proposal, in coming with their own opinion. And that, of course, is a result of a compromise, because in the European Council, there are 27 member states, 27 governments. So they have to find a common line. The Parliament, this is, I'm sure you know, like in any national parliament, there are parties, and so they need to find their agreement. As you can see, also, it took the Council about 1.5 years to come with their own opinion on the AI Act, and the Parliament more than 2 years. What happened after these two institutions have reached the agreement? They start negotiating. There is a process in the EU which is called trilogues. Trilogues means dialogue with three people. And those three people is exactly the Commission, the Council, and the Parliament. There is one difference, though, that while Parliament and Council are the decision makers, so they have to agree and they can decide, the Commission is not a decision maker any longer. But the Commission is very important, because the Commission is the body that has the highest technical expertise. I started working on AI policy in 2017. And I started working on the first draft of the AI Act in 2019. So when the text reached these two institutions, in the Commission, we have been thinking about it a lot. Whereas these two institutions start thinking about that later. So therefore, the Commission has, quite an important role in the negotiation process. It's just a technical advisor. Actually, in the jargon, so in the language in the EU, we call it honest broker, because we are not supposed to take a political position, but just facilitating an agreement. But in reality, the Commission is also a political animal, if you want. The text, therefore, was politically agreed in December 2023. And maybe that's when you heard for the first time the UI Act has been adopted by the EU. There was a huge press coverage in December 2023 because there was a political agreement on the UI Act. But the actual text was actually finally published only this year, in July, because there has been a lot of iterations also in the technical details. I mean, for those of you who are lawyers, you know very well that details matter, and matter a lot. And then enter into force the 1st of August. So now why I put some emphasis also on the dates? Because between the Commission proposal and the final adoption, there has been some important events. The first one was the launch of ChatGPT in this November 2022. This was very impactful for everybody. I think people, everyone understood that what is AI somehow. Before, maybe AI was something more for experts. But of course, because AI became something accessible to everybody, policymakers also felt a need to take that into account. There was also a letter from an NGO, I don't know if you're familiar with that, is an NGO founded actually by Elon Musk, among others, Future of Life Institute. In this letter, some researchers called for a pause on training AI systems or AI models more powerful than GPT-4. At the time was the frontier model. And finally, also an executive order by the Biden administration on AI. All these events somewhat played a role in that phase of trilogues that happened between September and December 2023. And we'll see later how. Now, the legislative phase is concluded. Now it's the new phase that opens up is the implementation. In EU law, implementation of the EU laws is primarily responsibility of the member states. There are some exceptions. For instance, some policies are directly enforced at EU level. Some antitrust policies, some trade law policies, and now also there is an emergency about digital legislation. So, but still the main, let's say, responsibilities lie in the member states, but there is also an important role to be played by the Commission going forward. The AI Act, let's say, does not necessarily contain all necessary details on how to interpret the law. There are parts of the Act that is fairly abstract. Therefore, the Commission actually has been tasked with adopting around 70 between executive forms of executive actions, they are called delegated acts or implementing acts, or guidelines to support the implementation. So therefore, although we have a law on the books, a lot of details are not yet there. And therefore, it's very important to keep an eye on the implementation phase that is already started. As a nature, the AI Act is a form of internal market legislation. So when we think about internal market in the EU, we think about the 4 freedoms that are at the basis of the EU project. 4 freedoms is about freedom of circulation of goods, services, capital, and persons. So these are really the foundational freedoms of the EU project. And therefore, internal market legislation are those type of legislation that aims to facilitate the free circulation of, in this case, products. So AI systems, the AI Act regulates AI system as a product, and the main goal is to enable, by creating common rules, the free circulation of those products within the EU. Because if we, let's say we didn't have an AI legislation, theoretically there could be, let's say, Italy that says, I have this issue with AI in my market, I want to regulate this. Germany may also say the same thing, and France the same thing. So there may be a risk of fragmentation of the EU market. That's why the AI Act aims to create this harmonized approach to regulating AI within the EU. And it uses a particular approach, which is that of adopting this new legislative framework, whereby, which is a particular type of legislation for products, whereby that's the same, for instance, legislation that is applicable to medical devices, toys, radio equipment. So most EU legislation has this approach when it comes to products. And the main characteristics is to require that products have a CE mark. The CE mark is a signal that is usually actually even visible on products, but it can also be used for software systems. That signals that that product is in conformity with EU law and therefore can freely circulate. So the idea is, because that product has been manufactured in accordance with European laws, then no country can basically prevent the circulation of that product in their jurisdiction. One peculiarity of this new legislative framework is that the law by nature doesn't enter into the technical details. So as you can imagine, AI is a highly technical matter, but if you look at the AI Act, I'm sure some of you have probably already read it and studied it. If you take, for instance, the requirements around data or the requirements around transparency, you don't always find all the technical specificities in the AI Act, because the AI Act is meant to be supplemented by harmonized standards. There is a process in the EU for European standardization, whereby essentially the standards are developed on a mandate by the European Commission to European standardization organizations to develop harmonized standards that supplement the requirements of the AI Act. So there is a specific link between the standards and the legal requirements. The AI Act is a horizontal piece of legislation. What does it mean? It means it applies to virtually all areas within the EU competence. There are certain areas that are not, let's say, fully, let's put it this way, under the EU competence. For instance, national security, military defense, these are areas that are broadly excluded from scope of the AI Act. As you can gather, doing a horizontal piece of legislation was probably one of the most difficult challenges in thinking about how to structure this for a number of reasons, including because sectorial approaches have their own needs and specificities. So we needed, on the one hand, to make sure that the AI Act would take into account of certain sectorial specificities, like for instance in law enforcement, financial services. And at the same time, we also needed to make sure that the AI Act would not generate tensions with other pieces of legislation. Because one thing is certain, that if we didn't have today the AI Act, it would not be possible to say that AI is not regulated in the EU. Because there is tons of EU legislation that is so-called technology neutral. So it applies also, either directly or indirectly, to AI systems. Think to data protection, so privacy legislation. The principles established by GDPR apply regardless of whether the processing is done by a non-AI software, a human being, or an AI software. So in that sense, one of the complexities of the AI Act was also to make sure that this legislation would not conflict or create tension with other existing legislation. And that, I think, was a challenge that, to be honest, still remains to be solved in the current version of the AI Act, so the final version. A couple of words about the scope of application. As you know, I've tried to give to this presentation a bit of focus around sort of the impact, right? So first of all, we need to understand to whom does the AI Act apply? So the first category of addressees of the AI Act are the providers that place on the market or put into service AI systems in the Union. So as a product legislation, the AI Act links the scope of application to the Union market. If I am a developer in Taiwan and I sell an AI system in Taiwan, the AI Act does not apply. But if I'm a developer in Taiwan and I want to sell my product and services in the EU, then the AI Act applies, even if I'm based in Taiwan. So that's the logic of the internal market. It also applies, so there are obligations for the providers. The providers are the ones in the AI Act that are subject to the highest compliance burden. Then there are obligations also for the deployers, who basically are the users. And the obligations for the users are only for the users based in the EU. But there are some exceptions. Notably, for providers and users that are outside the Union, but the output produced by the systems is used in the Union. So that's a bit, if you want, an anti-circumvention clause. So the idea is to apply the AI Act also to providers and users that are outside the EU that actually are not marketing the system in the EU, but are actually selling essentially just the output. It's really an anti-circumvention clause. The practical application may be a challenge, especially for enforcement. But it was meant to really avoid the situation that maybe European companies, instead of actually becoming users of AI system, would basically just send data outside the EU, being processed outside the EU, and get the data and get an output back, like AI system-based recommendations. There is an exception to those rules, notably in the area of law enforcement and sort of military defense, but that is somewhat less relevant. The idea essentially is that we don't want to prevent an overall coordination of EU authorities with other authorities outside the EU, especially in fields that are particularly sensitive, like, for instance, law enforcement. Other areas that are outside of the scope of the AI Act are, of course, national security, as I mentioned, is a kind of a typical prerogative of the member states, military defense, but also scientific research. Scientific research is also an area that is out of scope because as a market and product legislation, the AI Act focuses on something that is placed on the market. So that has a commercial dimension. An interesting also observation also regards open source AI systems. These are in principle excluded, but in fact, if you read a bit in between the lines, they are not excluded if they fall under one of the three risk categories that are regulated by the AI Act. So essentially, the AI Act only applies to those three risk categories. So de facto, there is no exclusion. I just mentioned the risk categories. So the risk-based approach is the main idea of the AI Act. And the idea is to regulate not the technology as such, but to regulate the application, the use cases. And how? By establishing rules that are somewhat proportionate or related to the risk. So the higher the risk, the stricter the rules. We have identified 3 layers of risk for which rules are compulsory. And then there is a 4th layer, the green one, where essentially these are applications like predictive maintenance system, where essentially the AI Act does not foresee any binding rules, but foresees the possibility of the manufacturer of those systems to voluntarily commit to apply certain rules. But there is no obligation to do that. So we'll focus on the other 3 risk layers because they are compulsory, and we'll see them in detail one by one. The first layer is for applications that are prohibited. The European Commission had foreseen those 4 categories on the left-hand side of applications that are prohibited. Primarily, the first 2 are around applications that are somewhat, that are leading to a harm for persons. In our initial formulation, we had foreseen a quite narrow set of harms, notably psychological and physical harms. These have been extended by the co-legislator to also cover other types of harm, so also potentially financial harm, provided it's significant. And the application prohibited must involve either some form of exploitation of vulnerabilities of persons or techniques that are subliminal or manipulative. The third use case is around forms of social scoring. By that, we do not mean scoring that is narrow, limited, for instance, to a specific context. Take the example of credit scoring, for instance. But what is meant there is really like broader set of a broader scoring approach around, the trustworthiness of persons or something along that nature. The Commission had foreseen only prohibition for public authorities, but the co-legislator have added also private authorities. And finally, the last use case is around the real-time remote biometric identification of persons in publicly accessible spaces for purpose of law enforcement. So all these conditions need to be met. So law enforcement purposes, public accessible spaces, and real-time identification. We had foreseen, so the Commission had foreseen a prohibition with some exceptions, and that is also the final version of the AI Act, foresees a prohibition with some exceptions, but the co-legislator have added quite some, say, friction on the use of those systems. So the exceptions are more or less the same, but the procedures that need to be complied with in order for those systems to be actually used by law enforcement authorities in certain situations are a bit more complex. The co-legislators also added these other 4 use cases on the right-hand side. So biometric categorization to infer certain sensitive characteristics like race, political opinions. Individualized criminal risk assessment based solely on the profiling of persons. Emotion recognition in 2 areas, workplace and education, with the exception when the emotion recognition is motivated by medical or safety reasons. And in all these 3, basically, all these 3 cases are forms of profiling of persons based on personal data. So in reality, these 3 use cases are already regulated by GDPR. And the AI Act foresees, if you want, in that respect, an indirect amendment of GDPR. The last use case is mostly reminds me that that's the reality of the Clearview situation. You may have heard about this company in the US, where essentially the policymakers were concerned about this collection of building of databases, facial images, and therefore one prohibition is actually to use AI systems to actually build up or expand databases, facial images. Moving to the next category of risk, high risk. There are two ways in which an AI system can be classified as high risk. The first one is when the system is a safety component of a product that is already subject to EU legislation. An example would be medical device or machinery or toys. So there are many products, mostly physical products, but not only. For instance, the medical device regulation classifies software as a medical device. So only even standalone software, if it has a medical purpose, is a medical device. But it's true the majority of products have some physical component, and AI can be used as a digital element of those products, more and more. So the AI that is a component of a product is high risk if the AI has a safety functionality, meaning it's aimed to protect the health or safety of persons, and if the product as a whole, according to sectoral legislation, is subject to third-party conformity assessment. Third-party conformity assessment is essentially an ex-ante certification of a certain product by an external body. In the EU, these are called notified bodies. So manufacturers may have, not always, but may have to basically have the product tested by a third actor. So that's one way. If the AI system is a safety component of a product, and if the product is subject to third-party conformity assessment, the system is high risk. The second avenue through which AI systems are classified as high risk follows is really different from the first one. The first one, in fact, is actually an approach that can update by itself, in the sense that there is a link between the AI Act and other legislation. The second one, it's self-contained in the AI Act, because the AI Act identifies 8 broad areas. These are the ones you see on the screen, like education, employment, law enforcement, and so on. But it's not the whole area that is considered high risk. So you need to look at Annex 3. And Annex 3 will have two parts. There is the heading, the area, and under each area there are a list of systems specifically listed. For instance, when it comes to employment, there will be systems used for hiring persons, or system used for the promotion of individuals. So essentially, the idea here is for the legislator to decide the broad area and the first set of use cases, and then for the Commission as the executive to have the power to update the use cases. So the Commission cannot update the areas, but can decide to add use cases under each area or remove use cases. So that was the idea, to keep the regulation future-proof. The third layer of risk is when the system leads to essentially transparency-related risk. So in this situation, the concern was primarily about the lack of information, either about the existence of an AI system or about the existence of generated content. And here, roughly speaking, the obligations are much lighter compared to high risk. There are 5 use cases in the final legal text. The first 3 were use cases that were already identified by the Commission. Notably, the first one is around systems interacting with humans. And here, the rationale is really around the classic situation we had in mind was around chatbots. So it's a matter of human dignity to ensure that people know if they're interacting with a machine or with another human. It's as quite simple as that, so you just need to inform people. They should not treat a machine like a human, essentially. That's also why, philosophically, I've always liked the idea to have AI regulation as a product regulation. To consider a machine, it's a product. It's not, should not be equal to a human being. The second use case is around emotion recognition and biometric categorization. So initially the Commission had only foreseen a transparency obligation. Why? Because, as I mentioned before, these are already regulated by GDPR. But the co-legislator decided to, in some cases, to prohibit them and to classify, in any case, all those systems as high risk as well. The third use case was around deepfakes, notably audio, video, and sound, as an obligation for the user of a generative AI system to label the content, to ensure that there is clearly indication that the content is generated by an AI, without hampering the display or enjoyment of certain content that is more of an artistic or creative nature. As you can see, so initially the Commission had not foreseen an obligation to label text. But this was added by the co-legislators. The co-legislator added an obligation to label as well also text when generated by an AI, if the purpose is to inform the public on matter of public interest. And there is no editorial responsibility, for instance, like newspapers. The other use case that was added by the co-legislator is the fourth one here, and that goes a step further, the labeling of content. It is about ensuring that any generated content, audio, video, text, or sound, can be actually detectable by an algorithm. So is the idea that the providers of those systems have to ensure that the output, so the synthetic content generated by generative AI systems can be identified as generated by an AI in a machine-readable format, so by another machine. As you may know, this is certainly a challenge as of today. The reliability of those systems is not there yet, but the co-legislators somehow felt they needed to push in this direction. So that's it for what I could say the risk-based approach. So the idea to regulate somehow the application level. You recall I mentioned at the beginning, ChatGPT, the executive order by Biden, so these events that happened between the Commission proposal and the final version of the AI Act. This chapter around general purpose AI model is somewhat the result of those events. It's a complete new chapter that was not foreseen in the Commission proposal and aims to regulate, so general purpose AI model is another word for foundation model, which is probably the term that is you're more familiar with. At least that's the scientific term that has been used by computer scientists. These are the models that are behind tools like ChatGPT. And so the co-legislators felt there was a need also to essentially set some rules for the foundation models. And this already gives you a sense of a different approach, in the sense that the idea is to regulate the model, not the system any longer. In fact, these rules apply also to open source models, with some exceptions. Now, what are these rules? There are two set of rules applicable to these models. The first set of rules apply to all foundation models. So all foundation models have to be documented from a technical point of view. There must be technical documentation That technical documentation also includes information around the computational resource used for training and energy consumption. There is also an obligation for the providers of the foundation model to provide information downstream, so to those developers who are using the models for their own application. And the third obligation is around copyright. So this was a quite heavily discussed topic, especially during the last 2 months of the negotiations. And so currently the AI Act says that the providers of all foundation models have to have a policy in place to ensure, to demonstrate how they plan to comply with copyright law. And they also have to publish a detailed summary of content, of the content used for training the AI system, the AI model. There is then the second category of models. These are subject to additional rules. So on top of what we have seen for the old models, there are going to be other 3 obligations. These are around risk assessment and mitigation, incident reporting, and cybersecurity. One of the most challenging questions when deciding to divide the regulation of foundation model in 2 tiers was to identify what is the triggering mechanism. How do we make sure that we can distinguish a foundation model, basic foundation model, from a foundation model with a systemic risk? Because the rules are different. And the co-legislator decided to identify essentially 2 avenues. The first one is to link the triggering mechanism to the number of flops used for the training. So 10 to 25. Biden executive order in October 2023 had foreseen some only transparency obligations, so the obligations are really different from what you see in the AI Act, linked to 10 to 26 flops. So the EU legislator decided to start from that and lower it to 10 to 25. And the second avenue is through a designation by the AI office. So models can be designated as model with systemic risk by the AI office based on a number of criteria that are listed in the AI Act. The AI office is the European Commission. So you will find in the text of the AI Act sometimes reference to European Commission, sometimes reference to the AI office, but it's exactly the same thing. So the AI office is a department of the European Commission. The chapter on general purpose AI models is quite, let's say, high level, so it's not very clear what are the risks that need to be looked at, what are the systemic risks. It's not very clear how to do the assessment of the mitigation. And that is why the Commission is now in the process of developing code of practice, whose main function is to enable compliance. So the code of practice is a bit like the standards. They are not supposed to be binding. So it's a voluntary tool. They may be used by providers of the models, of the foundation models, to demonstrate compliance with the rules of the AI Act. However, because those rules, notably these ones, are quite abstract, in fact, the code of practice will be, quite important in entering into a number of details that are not in the law. Just a quick comment about the innovation support measures. So the AI Act is not really, so it doesn't have innovation at its core, I would say. As I mentioned, the AI Act is about safety. It's about product legislation. So ensuring that AI products are compliant, are safe. So it's not really a legislation that has at its core the support of innovation. But there are some provisions around that, and notably the sandboxes. So the idea is to enable providers of AI system to experiment with AI systems in a controlled environment. So sandboxes have to be created by member states. So the member states have an obligation to create sandboxes. Those sandboxes do not necessarily foresee actually a derogation or an exemption from binding EU rules. So in fact, the sandbox are a more rather environment where companies are in direct contact with authorities and can somewhat venture into some form of experimentation, but they do not have an exemption from applicable law, whether it's about the AI Act or whether it's about privacy law. The only, let's say, advantage that they have is that they will not be fined if they follow the guidance of the authority and something, for instance, goes wrong. But they are still liable to third parties. So in the case something wrong happens in a sandbox, someone is damaged, they will still be liable. The sandbox also has some limited advantages when it comes to the processing of personal data, in the sense that companies that are part of the sandbox may actually reuse personal data in their possession in the public interest. So essentially, it creates, it's a bit complicated, but it creates an additional legal basis for the processing of personal data than what is somewhat foreseen in the GDPR. Another interesting novelty in the AI Act is the real-world testing. So unlike the sandbox is essentially a space where companies have to be in a program that is launched by the authorities and can do experimentation under the supervision of the authorities. The real-world testing is a situation where essentially the providers may test their systems independently. So they need to notify the authorities about the existence of this project. They want to test certain AI systems, but they can do it without necessarily the close supervision. So it gives a bit more freedom. However, there are a number of conditions that need to be met, including consents by the subject that are involved. There should be a testing plan. The market surveillance authority, so the authority needs to approve the plan, and the approval can also be tacit, and so on. But of course, the authorities can always intervene. So the authorities are on notice that, say, a testing is happening, and therefore can always intervene to modify, suspend, or terminate the plan. This is the timeline for the application of the AI Act, of all the rules. So the AI Act entered into force, as I mentioned, in August, but the rules do not apply all at the same time. In particular, so the first rules that apply will be after 6 months, so in February next year, about prohibited AI. In 12 months, so 1 year from 1st of August, will be the rules on general purpose AI. And 24 months is the general deadline of application of the AI Act. Essentially, all other rules are applicable, with the exception of the rules for AI as a safety component of products, in the case of medical devices, for instance. In this case, those rules have even more time to comply, so 36 months. I want to spend my last couple of minutes to briefly discuss sort of the Brussels effect. You've certainly heard a lot about this term. Notably after GDPR, people have started talking about the Brussels effect, how indeed other jurisdictions may align their policies to those adopted in Brussels. That's a bit what happened in some respects with the GDPR. Now, I think it's interesting as we start thinking about there will be a Brussels effect for the AI Act about what are the drivers, really, of the Brussels effect. There are some business considerations, in the sense that businesses may, by their own initiative, want to align their processes and procedures to compliance with the most stringent type of regulation. So if we assume, and for the time being that's the case, that the AI Act is the most stringent type of regulation of AI worldwide, then companies may want to voluntarily by themselves align their development practices to those of the AI Act, and therefore sell the same product elsewhere. So in that sense, you may have a Brussels effect as a consequence of a business decision, essentially. Companies deciding to, oh, I have to comply with the AI Act, but I'm also present in other markets. I'm going to apply the same rules. Of course, this is premised on one condition, that the product is the same. That may apply for a phone. That may apply for a robot, maybe. But when it comes to AI, maybe that's not always the case. If we think, for instance, about predictive system in the criminal justice environment, like a sentencing, a system to help a judge with sentencing. Those kind of systems are very much tied to the legal system of the jurisdiction. So it's more a question even for me as of today, but I wonder whether, you know, when it comes to AI, we may see the same Brussels effect from a point of view of the business, because the product may actually not be necessarily the same. They have to be adapted to the context. There are also policy considerations, in the sense that governments around the world may want to ask themselves the question, what are my companies? Who are my companies? Will I help them by aligning my own domestic legal framework to Brussels or not? So here, the Brussels effect, the driver is different. It's not a company decision. It's more something coming from the top, from the policymakers. And policymakers are also somewhat sensitive, in my view, to geopolitical considerations around what camp should I belong to, somehow. Which is, of course, very important when we hear discussions around G7, OECD, and so on. There is another important considerations to be made around, you know, what is the scope of the Brussels effect? As you have seen, the AI Act is fairly complex. It has substantive rules, it has procedural rules, it has governance rules. And so when we think about the substantive rules, and we try to make a link with the business consideration. So it may make sense for companies to say, I'm aligning my practices. But for instance, for high risk, where there's highest compliance burden, it may make sense to think, okay, if I have to comply with high risk in the EU, I'm going to use the same practices outside the EU. So the high risk is substantive rules. But the prohibitions, for instance, the prohibitions, essentially, there are no, so either you do it or you don't do it. So in a way, there are no impacts, at least to my mind, about internal business practices or procedures. So either you're allowed to do it or you're not allowed to do it. So there may be some variations around the Brussels effect, depending also on the type of rules of the AI Act. The same would apply for the governance and enforcement. Of course, you know, the whole AI Act has been built about the EU legal system with our structures. Does it make sense that other countries have the same type of structure? Probably not, because legal systems are different. Yes, that was my last slide. So thank you for your patience. I hope I didn't go too far with the timing, and thank you for your attention.
Dr. Mazzini, ladies and gentlemen, it's my great honor and pleasure to be here to have the chance to share some of my thought. But I'm very delighted to have the chance to listen such an excellent presentation. It's just to say the first hand, right? To talk about the EU Act. My name is James Liu. I'm the currently president of the Syscom group, which is mainly the system integrator in Taiwan. I also ever served as the chairman of the Taiwan Software Association. Now, currently, I'm the vice chairman of the Taiwan Cloud IoT Association, Economic Industry Service Alliance Association. Yeah, so. It should be a very a good chance to have the opportunity to share the thought and also to learn for the important the EU Act. So I prepared the slide, but maybe I checked the information from the public database, so maybe a little bit gap with Dr. Mazzini's, so allow me to apologize if there was some correction. So first of all, we learned from the excellent presentation from the Dr. Mazzini, the first hand introduced the European EU working on a comprehensive legal framework to regulate the development and use of the artificial AI, right? We learned, first of all, talk about the development of the AI with the ethical principle and the transparency and the explainability and also high-risk applications to regulate the net. And the EU Act, especially the strict requirements for the transparency and the accountability in the AI system, we learned it will influence the behavior, like if you sell and also sell the products or service to the EU customers. And we just learned not only the geographic in EU-related customers, right? So it's a very big thing to impact our society. And also the wide range, influence the wide range of industries. For example, like healthcare, finance, or manufacturing, which are all very familiar. Maybe we're working on every day, the industry. And also to the SME. SME must aware of the implication of the act and the tech steps to ensure the compliance. The AI system used by the business also need to implementing data protection measures and the developing risk management strategy. As we just learned very soon, right? Like 6 months, 12 months, 24 months, 36 months, right? Where totally impact the whole society for the prohibit general AI general application and also the high risk area, right? And in the last, I want to share about. Besides, we know the governance protection of the data, and giving the users of the connected products, such as the car owner, airlines, or wind turbine operators, they need more control over their data, ability to access and share it with the third parties, and also requirement the manufacturing to share the data with the third parties. Also, allowing the users to seamlessly switch between the different cloud providers. The main purpose is to avoid the vendor lock-in and establishing the efficient data interoperability and also in the EU cloud market. So the trade-off is the protection, governance, and also how to make the data transfer, the legally to prevent the illegal transfer, but also to promote the open of the data transfer. So I think it should be the most important thing we must to understand the EU Data Act, AI Act, and then we can learn how to make the benefit and to prevent the disadvantage. So in the end, the big data comes with the responsibility. So it's the risk, responsibility, and also the opportunities. I think we must find out the best solution. So it's my thought. Thank you.
Yes, when we wait for the prepared document, let me introduce myself. The whole Fred, literally I study computer science first. Then I do the IP law for the JD, so I'm mixed half-blood for the AI and the legal IP law. So today I will be showing for the case study for the AI plugs, so we can straightforward figure out our name. We use the AI to help the IP industry to have the better working experience. So let me introduce about our case. Adopt AI Act or GDPR. Okay, yeah. The vision is that I'm working for the IP industry over 22 decades. So the damage, the harm for the IP industry will be very steep neck, and yeah, my vision is worse and worse because I studied in law and prepared the practice. So that's the main reason we found AI plugs, how to help IP practitioner have better working experience. And we very thanks for the sportive for the Headline Asia, the Microsoft, NVIDIA, even the HEC Business School, and the Creative Disruption Lab. The reason I introduced the different organizations is because the later of the story will be disclosed more in detail. And we acquired the BSI for the GDPR, privacy, and all the protocol others. We found something very interesting. That is the elephant in the room. So you can see the volume for the patent and trademark is growing dramatically. So it means that people have very heavily workload for everything. So we seems very ambitious try to solve this kind of problem because we are very lucky can use in different LLM in the very first beginning since 2021. So we think if we can fix all the problems because the data overload and it's much more infringement risk increase and IP process always very complexity. So we think we find opportunity and we do a lot of experimental to fix the problem. But they have the different organization in the different region. We call SWIPO, Worldwide Intellectual Property Office, and the big IP5, US, EPO, JPO, something, or even China. They have the different policy we need to regulation, we need to obey. It's not easy to fix using AI to fix all the IP problem. Even that they insist human must be the inventor. But AI can do a lot of things, right? Everyone have the GPT. You can ask 1,000 questions, they can help. Even you can draft the patent claims in a few seconds. But the problem is, AI can not be an inventor, although he can do something. And even that we call the Falsita. Falsita means the person have ordinary skill in the art. Means you already have some kind of expertise in your industry. But after we in generative AI, this kind of the age, AI can do everything. So that means it's hard to acquire patent. It's much harder and harder. So because the regulation changes very quickly, so it's how to adapt the regulation. Because all the countries differently. Even become the designer, he tried to design a logo. I think they have the designer here is yes, GPT can do everything. You can, in second, have the logo. So what is next? Become the designer to the curator, or even the examinator, because like plenty of the prior art cases, you need to do the research. But just like you finding the needle in the ocean, you don't have any tool. So that is the big problem. So AI do a lot of things, but no one can audit for the AI to generate all the content, especially for the IP industry. Therefore, we using our model for AI plugs, we try to generate some about the content for the patent disclosure, or when we try to face to the market, the Taiwan market, we're very lucky to have the very great success market share in here, but the people or enterprise challenge about accuracy. How can you prove your accuracy? Because everyone can use AI, not you only. So, but in that time, we don't have any compliance about how to using AI to about accuracy. Therefore, we try to expansion to the Europe. So that's mean the supported by creative disruption lab in HEC Paris. They help us to knowing the GDPR. Even that's the reason I met Gabriele Mazzini, discuss about this kind of topic, because we realized if we try to expansion our business into the Europe, we should be follow the protocol. Even we are a tiny startup, the ambition to explore to Europe, we need to follow up. So they have the different experts to teach us about ethical, fairness, accountability. The key is how to make sure all the process have human oversight. Because we mentioned about IP means is somebody the privilege, because you have the right to do something or force others don't do something. So we need to secure all the data over even all the process with the human oversight. Therefore, we launch our product in the Europe in these years, and we're very happy to have this few users have to provide assistance to the IP practitioner to have the better life and improve their efficiency and try to make their clients happy for the experience, because we're using much smarter working flow thanks our team to doing that. And one more thing we need to share with everyone, and because the AirPlug signed the contract with the WIPO, WIPO, seems like we are the first technology companies to collaborate with the LLM model with the WIPO. And thanks God, we are the only guys know the traditional Chinese character, so so they don't have the choice to sign a contract with us. And it's been a very long journey to being WIPO signed contract. And the key is that even we are tiny startup, and we can do such big impact for the IP industry and LLM model. So thanks for everyone to focus my sharing. And we AirPlugs, we still confident about AI and technology. Thank you.
Thanks for Professor Ho's invitation, and thanks for Dr. Mazzini's insightful talk. And today I'm here to share some opinion from the developers. So my topic will be advocating for data governance. And because I'm right now the one of the core expert member of the Trustworthy AI Dialogue Engine project, which is operated by the NSTC. So I've listed some of my opinions here. Okay, so the first, I would like to mention that it's important to understand the differences between these LLMs and not treat them all the same from the largest model to the smallest model. So the first type would be commercial general purpose LLMs like Dr. Mazzini just mentioned, and the parameters like the parameters of these models are not disclosed, and the development cost is huge, like billions of dollars, and these models are easy to use directly for most general tasks without additional fine-tuning. And the examples are the big three: ChatGPT, Cloud, and Gemini. Yeah, so you just subscribe it and you can use it. Then the second type would be open source LLMs. So the parameters ranging from 2B to 400B. Now there's the smallest, even smaller one, 350 million. Yeah, and the development cost is comparatively less than the first category, from millions to billions of US dollars, not NT dollars. Okay, so these models offer basic knowledge, but need fine-tuning or integration with search mechanisms to perform effectively in real-world applications. So it actually cannot be directly used. If you directly use it, you will feel unsatisfied. Yeah. So example in this category would be like Llama from Meta and Gemma from Google and 5 Mistral. And the third type would be localized LLMs. They built from the second category, and they are continue pre-trained with local data sets, but therefore their performance would be harmed during this process. So originally, the open source LLM may know how to do like 500 tasks, but through this process, through the local data set continue pre-training, the models forgot everything. So the local team need to let the AI to relearn these things. Yeah. Unfortunately, the instruction fine-tuning data set of open source LLMs is not publicly available. So the local teams need to compile this data set by themselves. Yeah. So we can only like keep less than 40 tasks compared to the original 500. Yeah, so if you prefer localize the model, then you can choose this category. Yeah, but if you don't care, then you can choose this category. Yeah, so Tide is also located in this category. So I would like to use a metaphor like the first type is like moving directly into a full furnished luxury house ready for immediate use. And the second and third type are more like unfinished houses where additional work need to customization are needed before they can be fully functional. If you feel that you can live here, you can still use the second and third type, like camping in this house. Okay, so LM developer depends on high quality but inadequate data governance present challenges. I would like to talk about them in details. So developers need efficient access to large data sets, yet the process is often slow and complex. So developers is like the cook in a restaurant. We just need we just need vegetables, meat, the materials. Yeah, but we want a very efficient way to get these materials. And the second is leading companies fail to disclose their data sources and have not established the mechanisms to share the benefits with data contributors, although they claim that they still don't have any benefit. Yeah. And this lack of transparency creates distrust. Data providers suspect unauthorized use of their data, feel exploited, and resist further sharing. That is true, because I begged for data for almost over 15 months, but maybe all the data owner they express this concern to me, and consequently developers struggle to obtain sufficient legal and high quality data, which hides progress. So in the US, AI companies benefit from the most relaxed data regulations. So this allows them to efficiently access large data sets for model training. And this gives them a significant advantage in AI development. In contrast, Taiwan's most stricter data-related laws limit data sharing and usage. As a result, local LLM developers face challenges in acquiring data efficiently, widen the gap with global leaders. As to address this, Taiwan could consider the 3 steps. First, introduce fair use or permitted use provisions for data mining. And the second, establish legal data sharing platforms through government industry collaboration. Third is to create mechanisms to share benefits with data contributors, encouraging cooperation. But everyone knows that. How to do that? How to implement that? That is important. Yeah, so currently EU, Japan, and Singapore have all established legal frameworks for data mining. And these laws aim to provide clarity on how data can be used for purposes like training AI models, while balancing the interests of data contributors. So let's take a closer look at the key difference among these 3. So the EU allows data mining for non-commercial scientific research, but requires compliance with strict privacy protections and consent requirements. And Japan permits data mining under its Copyright Act for both non-commercial and commercial purposes. And Singapore also similar to Japan, but it is more relaxed than Japan. Yeah, so now most LLM developers like me in Taiwan have limited capital, and the domestic markets is small. So we don't have a lot of time, and we don't have a lot of money to acquire data. So I suggest Taiwan adopt Singapore's permitted use approach, which allows using legally obtained data for training models without notifying rights holders. Because if you are in my position, you need to query one by one, and that is so inefficient. And to protect right holders, valuable data can be safeguarded through paywalls like Singapore, ensuring a balance between innovation and data ownership. So this approach can help Taiwan remain competitive in the global AI landscape. And the next question is, how can we ensure everyone complies with permitted use laws when acquiring data? We all know that, you can put a robot.txt to block robots to crawl your data. But how do you know if the private company will follow the rule? So I propose a government-led data governance organization to create Taiwan's common core. So government led this organization to crawl data or to acquire data for everyone. So academic and nonprofit access would be free with an application and review, while commercial use would require a fee. And the organization could use these fees to compensate data owners who voluntarily contribute and format the data for AI training, providing developers with a legal and efficient way to access high quality data. And this organization also can do data preprocessing for everyone. You know, if you need to deal with 100B token data, do you know how many different formats within it? Do you know? It's 22 million different formats. Yeah, so if this organization can do that for everyone, then we developers have a very efficient way to get data. So that's the picture I just drew. Thank you.
So because my background is in law, I work at academic Sinica, Institute of European American Study. So my slide will try to have a dialogue with Gabriele's talk, especially offer some questions regarding the EU AI Act. So here is that very straightforward question is that why do we need to care? I think Gabriele talked about the Brussels effects, right? And we are in Taiwan, and now the European Union set up a law, and why we need to care. So before we have this EU AI Act, it's back to 2018, we have this the EU's data protection law we call the GDPR, General Data Protection Rule. And starting from that time, now where the many scholars trying to analyze the concept about the Brussels effect, about how the EU law may have set a global standard. So here is Professor Anu Bradford. Professor Bradford now teaches at Columbia Law School. And 2021, she wrote a book called The Brussels Effect. And if we see the side title, you say how the European Union rules the world. And just last year, she published another book called Digital Empires. And now the subtitle turns to The Global Battle to Regulate Technology. So if we try to see the impact of Brussels effect, especially before the GDPR, now GDPR is a data protection rule, right? So before the GDPR, now we see even within the European Union, every member state has different data protection law. So it's very much not be able to harmonize. But after the GDPR came into force, now we look at the European Union, we see is almost being harmonized, right? Because the regulation can direct be impacting to the member state. So member state doesn't really need to have an internal legislation process. Now we look at the rest of the world and we see actually the impact of the GDPR is that many states try to raise their privacy data protection rules in order to be regarded as adequacy state by the EU. So that's what we call the Brussels effect, is that one jurisdiction or one union, like a European Union, try to set up the rule, but the impact is actually global and worldwide. So now we see this extra territorial impact. So EU law actually doesn't really place a role to set up standard within the EU. It's now plays a role to raise the global standard setting. But what's behind the Brussels effect is like a policy strategy and political economy, especially if we talk about international competition. So if every member state or every state, they want to set up one rule, and that rule they want to have this global impact, will that be possible? Now we have to see what's the causes for the Brussels effect. First, we need to have a market, right? And that market need to be big enough. And also that market need to be considered important in the global or international competition. And also we need to set the standard high in order to increase the compliance cost. So not many companies, they can compete with the EU's company. And the rest is that we need to make these rules can be implemented, right? So if we look at this slide, we see the rate curve. It shows the development of software or new technology. And now the blue curve shows the breach of data protection rule. And what do we see from this slide? I think two things. One is technology always go very fast. So law is one step behind. And the other hand is that we see all these data giants. Actually, none of these data giants be registered in the EU. So all of these big tech company being regarded as the US and the California registered company. So the EU always want to try to regulate this company is outside of EU's territory. So how to do that? To do that is like to make your law to have this global impact, right? So now we move to the new question that I think Gabriele also mentioned about that. Would the EU new AI Act also have this global impact? Actually, I doubt it, because if we look at this global AI regulation landscape, and we can see now we have three very different models. The first one is the US model, or Japan model as well. It doesn't really have a very strict law, so it always respect market, and we call this market-oriented approach. The rationale behind is very simple, is that they don't want to have a very strict rule in order to block the innovation, especially all these important big tech company being registered in the US. And US has been played as a leader for the technology development. And the other model is the China model. Actually, China has a black letter law to regulate AI, but it's very different from the EU model. EU, we call this rights oriented model. The China is like, they try to regulate the private entities in order to let the private entities to collect data, but all this data need to be used by the state. So we say this model is the state-oriented approach. It doesn't really make the state as be subject to the rule. So the state is always outside of the rule of law. Now do we see the convergence or divergence? It's hard to tell now, right? But we see different models. So are we moving toward a global AI governance? I think more and more, there are lots of discussion talking about data sovereignty and sovereign AI. Professor Tsai just mentioned about the Tate model. It's one example and illustration to show the sovereign AI, is that more and more the states, they don't feel comfortable to share their data outside of the border because they don't want other countries to use their data to be a competitor. So to what extent will the EU AIA impact global AI practice? We probably need to wait and see. Probably need to wait for 3 years until this the AIA has been fully implemented. And another very important question is about the power. So who are the stakeholders to decide? Are we talking about the states, like the China model, or big tech, like the US model? Or are we talking about the rights protection, like the EU model? But who are the stakeholders? Now we see lots lobbying efforts, even within the EU. So who can play a role to make decision, and how to balance regulation and innovation. I think we mentioned about the compliance codes, right? So for the big technology companies is bearable. So they have this capability to bear with this very high compliance costs. Even though Facebook, Google, they lost one suit, but they are able to do that. But how about the startup and the middle or small companies? It's probably doesn't really be able to offer so much compliance costs. And one thing is also very important is about the underlying values, or we call the moral settings behind the AI. What's the purpose we want to use this AI, right? So now, even though the EU have a very strict rule and make these rules to respect democratic values, but well, if China or Russia, they doesn't really want to follow this way, well, how can we do, right? They have different values to follow. So from here is that now we are trying to promote something, and we probably need a new social contract. And that new social contract is that based on the old social contract, we only have a relationship between state and society, but all these big tech company, especially registered in the United States, it seems to be outside of this traditional social contract. So how can we make a new fair allocation of responsibility? And who should bear the cost of an externality? For example, if we ask one question through the prompt, it's actually very close clean energy and electricity, right? But now all these big tech companies, they don't need to be responsible for that. Would that be fair? And also, I'll just use this slide to introduce a little bit about Taiwan's, we've been discussed about the AI basic law. Now it's still a draft. Many people talk about what's the difference between this AI basic law here in Taiwan compared with the EU AIA. I would say it's very, very different, because if you look at the formality, and we can tell now the AI basic law is more like a guideline. So it tries to provide a legal framework to ask the government have this legal foundation to do something more. So we use this basic law as a guideline, and now like guideline have 7 principles. And all these principles are actually quite familiar with the AI plus data governance principle. So now with this law, and the law can provide a legal foundation for one government agency. So for example, the Ministry of Digital Affairs to formulate something. And now we also want to follow this risk classification norms and framework. But in Taiwan, the implementation would not be like the EU model, like the horizontal one. We will use this very, very much like the sector and ad hoc model. So for example, the health data, we go back to the Ministry of Health and Welfare to decide their framework. And for finance data, we have, my apologies. We have different ministry to do this. So the AI model to have this basic law is only to provide a legal framework to give the legal foundation for the government to do something. That's very different. And also, I think the last 2 slides I would like to probably raise some question. And some question has been discussed quite heavily in the literature as well. One is just like Gabriele mentioned about the EU AIA is more like a product safety rules. And many people mention about this risk-based approach. It's very different, because if we look at the rest of the rules similar or related to AI industry, for example, GDPR or Data Act or Data Service Act, it actually goes back to the rights base. So we have particular rights to protect. And now if we only look at the risk base, how can we have a balance between risk base and rights base, especially we talk about the fundamental rights impact assessment, how to do that. And another challenge is about, I think people question about whether we have too broad definition of AI system and risk classification. I think all these things has been debated heavily within the European Union for the past 2 or 3 years. And my question is that, Gabriele, do you see now the definition is adequate, or do you want to add on something? And also for the general purpose AI, the foundation model, many people challenge about now we put too much emphasis on the user side. But it seems that we didn't really have a clear responsibility sharing with the developers. Also, it relates to the we call the prioritize fairness in data extraction. That means that we can very easily to use public domain data, even though it's very different to gather data without outside of the public domain. But we didn't really ask about the permission or consent, or do you see this legitimate purpose will be enough based on the GDPR, or do we need to have another kind of legal foundation? Also talking about the transparency, but many industries, they can always and very easily to use intellectual property rights or trade secret to get rid of the transparency requirement, and how can we deal with this situation? And the last one is about the implementation, especially about, for example, the medical device rules plus AI or GDPR plus AI. And now in the future, we'll have more and more agencies coming up in order to implement AI. What's the picture image do you see in the future within these 3 years? And the last slide is very simple, is that I'm not sure how many people understand now if we use ChatGPT without subscription fees, now it's ChatGPT 3.5. Do you see this GPAI with systematic risk or without systematic risk? Yes. With systematic risk? Without. No. ChatGPT 3.5 will be considered as a general GPAI, so it doesn't really need to fulfill high requirement like risk mitigating obligation or transparency requirement. But I don't know why. I think if we just rely on the computing power 10 to 25 flops to decide, now ChatGPT 3.5 don't need to comply with transparency and risk mitigating obligation, but 4.0 need to have that. It doesn't really make that much sense, but I understand there must be a rationale behind, so I would be happy to know more about the rationale and the debate process. So it will be my last slide, so thank you so much.